Hello, everybody. My name is Pablo Boczkowski. I'm a faculty member at Northwestern University and director of the Center for Latinx Digital Media. Thank you so much for joining us for today's weekly virtual seminar of the Center. It is really a pleasure to have you with us today. The mission of the Center is to create knowledge about digital media in Latinx and Latin American communities across the Americas. Today's speaker is a leading scholar in this space. Lourdes Cueva Chacón is an assistant professor in the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State University. Valerie Gruest, a graduate student at Northwestern and an affiliate at the Center for Latinx Digital Media, will introduce Lourdes in just a minute. I'm delighted to note that today's talk is co-sponsored by the Alice Kaplan Institute for the Humanities, the Buffett Institute for Global Affairs, the Center for Global Culture and Communication, the Department of Communication Studies, the Department of Radio, Television, and Film, and the Latina and Latino Studies program. Before we go into the seminar, I would like to start by acknowledging that Northwestern is a community of learners situated within a network of historical and contemporary relationships with Native American tribes, communities, parents, students, and alumni. It is also in close proximity to an urban Native American community in Chicago and near several tribes in the Midwest. The Northwestern campus sits on the traditional homelands of the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Ottawa, as well as the Menominee, Miami, and Ho-Chunk nations. It was also a site of trade, travel, gathering, and healing for more than a dozen other native tribes, and is still home to over 100,000 tribal members in the state of Illinois. It is within Northwestern's responsibility as an academic institution to disseminate knowledge about native peoples and the institution's history with them. Consistent with the university's commitment to diversity and inclusion, Northwestern works towards building relationships with Native American communities through academic pursuits, partnerships, historical recognitions, community service, and enrollment efforts. Let me say briefly about how the seminar will unfold. First, Valerie will tell us more about Lourdes' research and career in just a minute. Then Lourdes will deliver her seminar. After that, we will open for questions. Please enter your questions in the Q&A function of the webinar. Valerie will moderate. At the end, we will deliver some closing remarks. Once again, many thanks for joining us. And without further ado, Valerie, the screen is all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pablo, thank you very much for having me as a moderator for the seminar. It is an absolute honor for me to introduce our guest speaker for today. Dr. Lourdes Cueva Chacón holds a BA in Industrial Engineering from Universidad de Lima, an MS in Information Science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, an MA in Communication from the University of Texas at El Paso, and a doctorate in journalism from the University of Texas at Austin. Her research focuses on important questions about social, historical, and systemic forces, as well as individual traits that influence journalism practices and routines and their coverage of minority and marginalized communities in the US. Through her experience teaching in El Paso and Austin, she reconciles life experiences and community knowledge with the demands of news organizations. Dr. Cueva Chacón has a focus on Latin American journalism and how digital tools are changing journalistic practices in the continent and the ways these new practices are strengthening democracy in these countries. Dr. Cueva Chacón is currently an assistant professor in the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State University. She has served as a journal and conference reviewer, as well as has engaged in multiple endeavors within the academic departments of several prestigious universities. She is also a member of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, serving within the NAHJA Edu Task Force. And Dr. Cueva Chacón is also an author of an extensive selection of journal articles, book chapters, and conference papers, including Mapping Digital Native Latinx News Media in the US, Stronger and Safer, Motivations for and Challenges of Transnational Collaboration in Investigative Reporting in Latin America, From a Latino-Oriented Niche to the Multicultural Mainstream, a comparison of Univision and Fusion's most popular online news contents, among many others. In addition to her academic work, she was a designer and digital content manager for an online platform and innovative journalism education initiative that prepared young bilingual and bicultural journalists for jobs in news media. Over the years, she has been an active member in society through her community service and volunteer experiences. We are so honored to have Dr. Cueva Chacón today to share with us her experience and knowledge. Thank you so much. The screen is all yours.
Thank you very much, Val, and thank you everyone for your time for coming here to listen to my presentation. Before starting, I really would like to thank not only Pablo Boczkowski, but also the center and the university for helping to create this space that was very well needed among the Latinx media scholars in the US and Latin American scholars also in not only in the US, but in the world. I'm going to start my presentation by sharing my screen. Give me a sec, please. I have lost the screen where I have the presentation. Just a moment. Okay, I recovered it. If you can let me know, please, if it's okay. Are you seeing it?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies for the confusion. So again, the reason I'm here is to present the research I do about motivations, challenges, and the role of digital technologies in transnational and national collaborations. This research is focused mostly in Latin American investigative journalism. So as part of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about, why it's necessary to study collaborations, why are those important in Latin America. I'm going to go over a little bit of literature review, and then I'm going to talk about two different projects. One was a survey that we conducted in 2017, and the second one is still ongoing, and so I'm going to just give a preliminary data from that, and it's based on focus groups and digital ethnography. And so why study collaborations, and why study collaborations in Latin America? I think this is more a necessary justification for the general public. For scholars, most of the time we don't need excuses to study phenomena, but we need the general public to join us in this interest in researching about collaborations in the world, and especially in Latin America, for several reasons. The main one is because in several parts in the continent, and I can name, of course, Mexico first, maybe then Venezuela, but in many other parts in Latin America, the press are constantly being attacked. The extreme case is Mexico with the violence against journalists, but there are other ways that the press is being attacked. The freedom of the press is being constrained and restricted through different ways. And in addition to that, corruption is touching also our colleagues. And so it's important to see how collaborations among news organizations within a country or across borders can help not only fight this, but uncover it, and through that help support the democracy, the development of a plural press and stronger democracies. The other reason is because the digital news organizations that are coming out now have a different impetus for their work, and they are looking at sometimes they're called niche spaces, but topics and issues that larger, more established legacy media are not interested or cannot cover. And so we're seeing an increase in collaborations among organizations that are interested in highlighting environmental problems, for instance. And so we need to learn how through successful and maybe not so successful collaborations, other journalists in the region can learn and improve their practices, get stronger and better at what they do. And so talking about literature and reviewing what scholars have done previous to my research, we can learn that investigative and watchdog journalism in America has a long history. It's not as long as probably in other places, but it's been happening. It has had up and downs. The 80s and the 90s was a strong time for investigative journalism in Latin America. Silvio Weisword and Rosenthal Alves have done research about that. And in most recent times, especially in the 21st century, the things that we're looking at that are happening to investigative journalism in Latin America is there's a lot of crime and corruption and a lack of a strong investigative culture that are stopping investigative efforts. And so Saldaña and Morao have done research about that along across the region. And those are the three things that most journalists mention that are challenges to developing or working on more investigative projects. The other thing that we have to look at is how the development of digital journalism has happened in Latin America. We can say that it's kind of been on par to other places in the world, but as research by Harlow and Salaverria and the International Center for Journalists show, it hasn't necessarily been as sophisticated as in other parts of the world, especially the global north. Nevertheless, digital journalists in Latin America face the same risk as their counterparts. And so they are also attacked, are the victims of attacks, not only technologically, but also the use of social media, for instance, to attack women, especially, is another phase of digital journalism that is impacting the work of our colleagues in Latin America. And finally, collaborative journalism. And so, as I mentioned in my presentation for this talk, collaboration among journalists is not something new. It has happened since the mid-1800s, but it's not common because there was a culture of competitiveness among news organizations. Like you didn't want to someone else to take the scoop and get the news break the news before you. And so that competitiveness was an obstacle before. And so what is happening now that we're seeing more and more collaborations. One of the things that we're looking at is that publishers, scholars, and foundations are finding that digital networks are helping those collaborations. There's also this development of this open source mentality that involves not only developing and giving people access to things that you produce, but also incentivizing them to use them and to participate. And definitely there's also an innovation impulse. So the more tools, the more digital tools that are accessible to us, the more people participate and think about, new ways of using those and innovate in different technological aspects. And finally, there's this idea of this new generation of journalists and this moment in time are giving journalists opportunities to learn more. And so they say that when they collaborate, they share this idea of have a common mission, and that they want to incorporate more data and also as motivations to participate, but they also have some common challenges. So there are studies that have been done mostly in Europe and Finland, and these help us to set a base for our study in Latin America. And so talking about the first study, this is a study I co-authored with Magdalena Saldañas. She's coming soon in the speaker series. I highly recommend listening or watching her presentation. So in this project, what we did is we worked with a survey that was conducted by the Knight Center for Journalism in the America at the University of Texas at Austin. And it was conducted in December 2017. So we got participants from 20 different countries in Latin America, and we used a quota system by country. So we wanted to have participation that was representative, and we based that in because there are no records of numbers of journalists in each country. What we used was the country's population. And so the initial sample was 1,541 participants, and 251 of those journalists said that they conducted investigative journalism in a regular basis. So what we wanted to learn from the participants was if there were differences between journalists who had participated in collaborative efforts and those who hadn't collaborated. We also wanted to know if there were any variables that correlated with participation in collaborative projects. And I'll go into detail about this in a little bit. And then we wanted to know what they considered were the main motivations to participate, and what were the most challenging aspects of working in collaborative projects. And so what we found was that in terms of differences between journalists who collaborated and journalists who hadn't collaborated, is that 60% of the participants who did investigative journalism had participated in national collaborations. So that means that all the organizations that participated were in one country. And then 45% of the participants had collaborated in transnational collaboration, so across borders. And we found that that was important. Because as you can say that about half of our participants had collaborated. In terms of investigative techniques, we found that participants in collaboration showed higher levels of savvy investigative techniques usage. And to establish what a savvy investigative techniques usage is, we actually established an index. And so, for instance, we asked participants if they had access and downloaded data in a regular basis, if they did data analysis, so textual analysis or computer-aided analysis. We asked them if they search scholarly databases. Also, we asked them if they did computer-assisted reporting, if they did web scraping, which is downloading and getting information from websites, getting data, and then if they had used mathematical techniques such as running average or using pivot tables in spreadsheets, for instance. And so we found that there was a difference. So participants who said that they had collaborated either at the national or transnational levels, they show that they higher levels of these savvy investigative techniques. In terms of gender, there was no difference. So that's what I didn't include it here in case someone is wondering about that. But there was difference in terms of age. So the participants who had participated in national collaborations were slightly older than those who hadn't collaborated. And there was no difference in terms of age at the transnational level. And this is important. One of the things that when we started this study, we thought that, these new generations of journalists are more literate in all digital. And we realized that that's not necessarily true. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But again, so the participants who had collaborated at the national level were slightly older than those who hadn't collaborated. Then what are the variables that influence collaboration? So these are the things that we look at, trying to see what correlated with participation. So in terms of national collaborations, age, the type of organization, so if it was a digital news organization, if it was television, print, or radio, those are the different types of organizations that we look at. Then the region, so what part of Latin America you were, and then if you use savvy investigative techniques, those variables predicted collaborations at the national level. So our model suggests that all the reporters located in Brazil or the Andean region or the Southern Cone working for digital native organizations and using savvy techniques often have higher odds of collaborating nationally than those who are younger, located in Mexico, working for either print or TV outlets and not using savvy investigative techniques in their daily work. And so this is interesting. And I'll talk at the end a little bit more about Mexico, for instance. So why journalists in Mexico are less likely to participate in national collaborations. And definitely, previous literature says that the risks that their jobs involve are part of the reason, right? In terms of transnational collaborations, it wasn't the same. To participate in transnational collaborations, the region where you located and the type of organization were the variables that correlated with higher levels of participation. And so again, our model suggests that those located in Brazil have higher odds of participating in transnational collaborations than Mexican reporters. And also those working for print have lower odds than those working for digital natives. And so in terms of the motivation and challenges, what we did was a qualitative textual analysis. And so when we read the answers, these were open-ended questions for the reporters. When we asked about what were their main motivations to participate, in terms of the national collaborations, they said that they were moved by the public's interest. So Their main reason to participate was that because they thought that finding the truth and showing it and sharing it to the public was their main goal. And so they were looking to better their society. And then the other one was keeping each other safe. Safety was something that a lot of journalists mentioned, especially Venezuelan journalists. We can understand why, because of the situation they're living there. We now know that there are journalists, the exodus of Venezuelan journalists is very high. In a report, I think from 2018, there's about 500 or so journalists that have left Venezuela and are reporting from other places. But in addition to the Venezuelan journalists, we had also journalists from Mexico and Central America that also mentioned this. And it's interesting that it's also part of the collaborations at the national level. So they were saying that by working as a group, they were able to keep each other safer, because the attacks from the different groups, either politicians, the government, or the criminal organizations they wouldn't work as easily if they work as a team. At the transnational level of collaborations, the main motivation mentioned by the journalists was this: they were seeking to verification of information. So, and considering the time when we did the study, which was 2017, we can have in mind, for instance, that the Lava Jato uncovering was happening that has affected so many countries in South America. And so it was important for journalists to make sure that whatever they whatever was happening in the region was possible to be verified. So they thought that by working together, they would be able to verify that information and provide a better quality product. And so, and then at the national and transnational level, we found these other three reasons for collaborating. They wanted to make a larger and broader impact with their work. They were looking for quality process and product, and they thought that as a group they could do it. And finally, they wanted to learn and share. And this was also very important for them, because they thought that by collaborating, they were not only trying to go for the news, but in the process they were learning, and they were sharing also what they're learning. And so this relationship that they were looking for, it wasn't only all beneficial for the public, but it was also beneficial for them professionally, personally. But we can see that as a consequence of that, we get better journalism also. In terms of challenges, there was no difference. All of the challenges that they mentioned were shared across in terms of national and transnational collaboration. And what they mentioned was that it was problematic to try to manage projects that were large, that would go across news organizations and across borders. And so it was difficult, and they had to work on that. Then the other problem was leadership and competitiveness. And when I talk about my current research, we're going to see that this is also something that it comes up often, because they talk about, and it's combined also with the other challenge, which is establishing an editorial line, because they are talking about how digital natives and legacy media have different ways of working, and it's very important to establish a chain of command and decide who are the leaders, and then fight the competitiveness, because some organizations don't want to abide by this idea of everyone, releasing their products or their investigations at the same time. They still have that spirit of trying to breaking news first. And then finally was the fact checking. Like it was difficult. It's interesting that this is a motivation and at the same time it's a challenge for journalists. But fact checking is one of the challenges, to make sure that everyone works at the same level or the same standard of quality, and being able to have access to the same type of information in order to be able to fact check what they are going to be releasing. And so what are the conclusions of this first study? And so the practice of national and transnational collaboration is still scarce. And so you can see that from our initial sample in among participants, we have 1,500, a little bit more than 1,500. Only 251 were journalists who practice investigative journalism in a regular basis, and among them, about 50% participated in national and transnational collaborations. And so that's even less than that, right? And so the practice, even though it's becoming more popular and we're seeing it more often, is not as spread yet. And what are the implications of that is one of the questions that that we should ask as scholars, right? Digital knowledge matters, and it is tied to experience and expertise. And so, again, like I was mentioning before, when we started this study, we were sure that younger generations of journalists that are so good at social media and new tools, and know how to work their content for different platforms, we're going to be the ones leading in terms of collaboration. And we found some of that, but it's not all, right? The digital knowledge is important, but it has to be tied to experience and expertise. And so how much do they use databases, how much they understand how to use the data, it's very important. And so what we need to keep searching and questioning about is, is it that more experienced journalists are the ones who are pushing for more collaborations, or is it that it's just the digital skills that are pushing for collaboration? And we have to keep looking, for more detailed on that on that area. Then the motivations, and looking at how they describe the motivations and their the challenges, we can see that the motivations are clearly focused on societal and individual factors. So they want to improve and better their communities. They want to deliver truth. They want to, help people, by uncovering corruption. And they also, at the same time, they want to keep themselves safe. It's very important for them, and so and we can see why, like again mentioning what's happening in Mexico and Venezuela, but there are other parts in the country that journalists are being attacked. A few years back it was Ecuador, In Peru, right now, we have several journalists who have been sued, for libel or different reasons, in a way to stop them to keep working on their research. And so, again, motivations focus on societal and individual reasons or factors. And the challenges that they mentioned were more focused on structural factors related to the professional practice. And I found this very interesting, and it's also very motivating to me as a scholar, because it makes me believe in humanity. So we are, as a guild, as a group of people, we are looking to better our society, and the challenges that we have are things that we can fix, because those are structural. We can identify them, we can categorize them, and we can fix them. And so we need more information, of course, we need more detail, but at the same time, I feel like those are things that can be overcome. And so journalists, and I think I already mentioned this, journalists who participate in collaborative projects want to make the profession stronger, as well as safer for themselves. And that really is, it's very motivating to me, at least. So in the second part of the research, and this is ongoing research, I cannot tell too much about this, first because it is still ongoing. I'm still doing analysis of this data, but it's also because it involves other researchers, and I don't want to give away on what they're working. But on my side, I can say that I participated with focus interview journalists through focus groups, and in those there were a little bit more than 20 participants, and they came from 11 countries from Latin America. We talked with them for about an hour and a half, and we made sure to try to invite journalists that were diverse in terms of age, gender, race, and experience in collaboration. So we could have, a broader takes on what collaboration involves. And so what I can share from my preliminary observations is that small digital natives struggle to keep their focus and constantly risk spreading too thin. And so what this means is that, they said that when they are invited to participate in collaborations, they usually get very enthusiastic about that. But sometimes those collaborations are not necessarily, part of the topics of the issues that they want to focus on. And so it's a struggle in between trying to collaborate and, participate in these projects, and then spreading their resources to think or themselves, their human capital. But what it shows behind this is that, or what can look at behind this is that there is in general, like a positive attitude towards collaboration. Like it wouldn't be a struggle if you didn't want to collaborate at all. So they really look forward to this. Now they're on the other side. They're trying to see how they slow down with collaborations, because it might make them lose focus. The other thing is that partnerships between digital natives and legacy media specifically deserve more attention. And so, because there's developing a symbiotic relationship, and the digital natives tend to be more flexible, data-oriented, and show interest in areas that legacy media do not or cannot cover. So they are helping legacy media to expand their repertoire or their offerings. which is very beneficial for them. It also helps legacy media look a little bit more, up to date, flexible. But in exchange, what is happening is that digital media is natives, and it usually is smaller than legacy media. What are trying to get from them is that they're trying to get through their audiences, like, get themselves to be known through the legacy media audiences. And they also using legacy media as protection. With all of the risks that I mentioned about the attacks to the press, and especially through social media, the first face that the public see when these collaborations are published is the larger legacy media, right? And so in a way, you could say that digital natives are taking advantage of these, but at the same time, it looks like it's a symbiotic relationship. So they know it's not something hidden or that it's been done, covertly. It maybe it hasn't been discussed as open, but it's happening. The legacy media also have, more resources in terms of lawyers or other ways to defend themselves. And so these partnerships, I think, that deserve more attention. And finally, there is enough material out there to analyze discourse in relation to collaborations. And I'm more a qualitative researcher, and I like to see it, how is it that journalists are talking about this and what it says about their culture and their practices. In 2017 or 2018, I don't remember, at one of the ISOJ conferences, the International Symposium of Online Journalism, that is hosted by the Nye Center. Collaboration was kind of like all the rage, right? It was, everyone was talking about that. Everyone was not only talking about the collaborations they've done, but also the tools that they developed and wanted to openly share with the attendees and the world. And so I through the discourse, you can see, how those mindsets, those cultures are developing, and how that can be beneficial for the profession or not. And so things that I'm looking at recently is, what is the discourse around solidarity, that now they're talking about collaborations as a way to show solidarity. What does this mean, right? And is it solidarity to each other, solidarity between countries or among countries, and what does it mean in terms of relationships? What solidarity as equal partners, solidarity in a hierarchy, and then complementary, and it's about the same idea, how journalists see each other, and if these digital natives that are more proficient in digital tools are looking at their legacy partners as equals or not. And so I'm interested in all that discourse. I think that's the end of my presentation. And I want to thank you, before I finish and open to questions, to Rosenthal Alves and my colleagues at the Nye Center for Journalism in Americas. Expect a lot more research about this coming from them. And special thanks to my co-author, Dr. Magdalena Saldaña. And you can find me there at Twitter usually. Thank you, and thank you everyone for staying this long.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation, Lourdes. I know we all enjoyed it a lot.
Muchas gracias.
And as a reminder for our audience, please submit your questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Dr. Cueva Chacón will be addressing all questions, or at least the majority of questions that we can during the remainder of the session. So please submit to the Q&A. And just to get us started, I wanted to ask, at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about field work and how this is used in Latin American countries. So my question is, what type of field work is required in Latin American countries to tackle issues of restrictive and restricted freedom of press and corruption in regard to media collaborations?
Thank you for the question, Val. Well, field work is difficult, especially in countries in Mexico, for instance, but it's possible to be done. There is research by Celeste de Bustamante and Janine Rayleigh, for instance, that have done extensive work on the border regions of Mexico and you know, the violence there. It's difficult for women also doing research, but sometimes in your own countries, it's easier because you can blend a little bit. And so that's one of my dreams, like to be able to have a sabbatical or a semester where I can go to Peru and spend more time observing, you know, what happens. But at the same time, I mentioned digital ethnography because now we can, even though mediated, we can still observe, you know, things that are happening on the ground. And if you triangulate with interviews, you know, and maybe other methods of research, you can get a clear picture of what's happening. And so even though field research is restricted in some of our countries in the region, it's still doable, you know, depending on how you plan it.
Yes, and building off of that, how can we overcome barriers to access on innovation tools, especially in marginalized communities and developing countries?
That's a great question. Again, one of the things that I found through my research is that at least in most of the journalists who collaborate have shared this mindset of the open source, or what is called the open source mentality, right? That they are trying to not only use open source tools, but also develop them in a way that they can share. So if you check the work by Chequeado, for instance, in Argentina, that has been, you know, that model has been copied in many places. They also not only do their work, but they also develop different tools that are open source that they can share. And so I think promoting that, supporting that type of work is a way that we can give communities with less access to innovation or less access to technology tools to produce their own, you know, their own journalism.
And building off of this open source mentality that you just mentioned, if we add the component of the competitive nature of releasing news first, how can media collaboration mitigate the negative effects that arise from this?
Well, again, like I said, these journalists who decide to participate, you know, they have this, I don't know what to call it, but what I've seen in the interviews is this extra energy, right? This extra, I don't know, if there's not only the attitude and the mentality with this impulse to change. And so even though you might not find it at the same levels in everyone, and there's the intention and of, you know, keep fighting for what they think is right. And but they have to protect themselves. And then so that's where the group, you know, comes to, and they can that way they can protect themselves. And I'm not completely sure I'm answering your question, so if you want to rephrase it, or I can keep trying to answer it.
No, that was great. And you mentioned right now the concern for safety on the journalist side. Are there institutions or programs that protect them from any harm that they might encounter along the way? Or is it more on the side of the community protection and safety between journalists that they rely on?
The organizations that protect journalists the most are the own journalism organizations. So because the attacks are different in different places. And so in Venezuela, for instance, and I'm trying to remember what was the other country, journalists have received attacks from the public too. And so, and the attacks are not necessarily against themselves and against journalists. So for instance, in Venezuela, one thing, and I forget the researcher who observed these, one of the main problems that they have is that they cannot use mobile reporting tools on the streets, because then they're going to be robbed or attacked. And so, and that comes from the public. It's not necessarily the government or any or any other group. It's just you know, not even criminal organizations. It's just the levels of criminality in general, and or I would say poverty in the country, right? And so again, attacks come from different parts and are different in different countries in the region. And so the organizations that are better at protecting them, journalists, are journalism associations or, you know, guilds. And what we have to do is actually support them more. And so at the international level, you know, Reporters Without Borders and or the other different international groups are good at making those problems more visible to the rest of the world, and that work has to continue. But at the same time, at the national level, journalists need more support. Journalist guilds and associations need more support.
Great, thank you so much. And we actually have a question from Facundo. So Facundo, go ahead.
Thank you all, and thank you, Lourdes, for this fantastic presentation. I think that my question is, given the motivation that you mentioned, that journalism have mostly centered around the idea of public interest, and also this that you mentioned, this impulse to change that journalists have. Do you think that investigative journalism can have a role in reconstructing or rebuilding the trust that journalism in general as an institution have been losing for the past decades, particularly in Latin America? Yeah, I think that this is my question. Thank you.
Yes, yes, I do believe that, you know, investigative journalism can help media in general recover the trust that it has been losing. The problem is that investigative journalism and collaborations are still a practice that is not spread. And what has happened a lot, and I can talk about Peru more, but it's the high quality investigative journalism that was developed in the 80s and 90s, and that was able to become mainstream in Latin America because of different reasons. But one of the reasons is the corruption of the political political actors in different places has become more like what is called denuncismo, right? It's instead of actually doing in-depth investigation, people confuse that with just denounces, you know, audios or videos that are released and just produce, you know, a scandal. Of course, it's important that the function of the sources for journalism and the whistleblowers is important for journalism, but instead of going deeper into what's causing, you know, the corruption, some press only releases audios or, you know, audios that are compromising or videos that are compromising, but they don't go further in that, and so it's a problem. So I do believe that serious, high quality investigative journalism can restore trust, but the problem is that there's not enough being done, and it's being confused with denuncismo, which is it's definitely not the same, right? And so if we see work as the Panama Papers, the FinSec, I think is the latest one, are examples of projects that, you know, have serious repercussions, that we have people that has been jailed or at least uncovered because of that work. And at a smaller scale, and I can speak more about Peru, for instance, but smaller organizations are uncovering other stuff. Like it's so Ojo Público in Peru has this project called Memoria Robada, or Stolen Memory, who is a project that it's that data journalism also. Like it look at all the cultural artifacts that had been stolen from Peru and had been taken away from the country. And so they done this research about, you know, who, when, what, that you can look at, and that any other organization has been paying attention to that, right? And it's very important. And like that example, there are several other cases, not only in Peru, but in other places, things related to environmental issues, and are also important, and a lot of digital natives that do investigative reporting and uncovering stuff about deforestation or, you know, corruption, things like that, that are very important for us as societies. But again, there's not much being done still.
All right. Thank you very much. Lourdes, we're perfectly on time. It's 12:59 here. Thank you very, very much again for a terrific seminar. Thank you, Valerie, for superb moderation as always. Thank you, the audience, for staying with us through the end. And I invite everybody to join us next Thursday at the next weekly seminar of the Center for Latinx Digital Media. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you for the space.